Welcome to the Dana Parish Podcast. Today I'm joined by Brianne Dressen, co-author of Worth a Shot and co-founder of React 19. In this episode, she reveals shocking details about what top public health officials knew and hid from the public about widespread vaccine injuries. She shares her powerful story of resilience and advocacy for the unheard. Be sure to follow me and subscribe to the Dana Parish Podcast. Brianne, it's great to meet you finally.
Oh, it's so good to meet you. I've heard a lot about you.
You are such a force for good. You're such a force for truth. And what really struck me about your case is that you volunteered for a clinical trial for AstraZeneca. And by the way, I should mention, you have gone on to write an incredible book called Worth a Shot. You co-authored that book. You have a film out now, a documentary that we can talk about, and you can tell everybody where to see it, called Follow the Silenced. And you started a remarkable organization called React 19 that helps other vaccine injured people like you. And I know you've raised a lot of money. And then also the notorious Yale vaccine post-vaccine study. You are an author on that. So lots to talk about today. But I just wanted to thank you for talking to me and sharing your story, because a lot of people have not been exposed to this information yet. And I think it's the most important thing that they need to know, that's just not been transparent at all. And so many people are suffering in silence. So thank you.
Yeah, I really appreciate that. I mean, everybody thinks that they know everything already. Everyone thinks that they've heard it all and they just want to put it to bed and move on. But the problem is people actually don't know. They don't know what was known when and who was doing what behind the scenes. And we actually, because we were on the front lines and literally there, we know what happened. And it's something that we need to shine a light on, because there's several things that happened that we cannot afford to allow. It's one thing to, go through an emergency and, everybody's doing the best they can. But now is the time to really take a rational approach, remove all the political dynamics, and just be fully transparent on what worked and what didn't, so we can improve on this. So I really appreciate the opportunity to talk to you.
My pleasure. So if you don't mind, I know you've told this story many, many times, but for people who have not heard it, would you mind just telling us what happened and what made you enter a clinical trial for the AstraZeneca COVID vaccine?
At the beginning of the pandemic, I was really worried about the cases and, the issues that we were seeing in the hospitals. I have several family members that are medical professionals, and they were telling us really sad stories of what was going on in the hospitals. And so we were taking social distancing very seriously. We were collecting masks and donating those to the hospitals. We were making masks. We collected supplies to take down to the Navajo Nation, which really got hammered by COVID. So we were doing everything we could to show our kids that even though things were different, we could still be resilient and help our communities, uplift our communities to really get us all out of the pandemic. So we were fascinated with the clinical trials and the news that was coming out from all of the news sources showing this incredible progress with phase 1 and phase 2, and they were releasing insanely high efficacy numbers. So when it came to phase 3 for all of the COVID vaccines, it was just a matter of getting more numbers built up in the clinical trials so they could show that they were robust enough to be unleashed on the public. So when it came to that point, I thought, oh yeah, I'm going to enroll. So I signed up, but it really was just to add a number, to help hasten the work so the vaccines could reach the market as soon as possible. Wow. Because they were supposed to end the pandemic, right? They were supposed to get us all back to normal. And I was more than happy to enlist in the fight.
So you got your vaccine, you got one, right? Is that the way it worked? You just got the first one, and then what happened to you?
So the clinical trial was actually a 2-dose series, and my reaction started with the first dose. When I went in, the drug company had signed a contract with me that if there was anything to go wrong, they would help financially and medically if there was an issue. And that helped reassure me in the process. It's like, oh, they're willing to put this in writing. This is a reasonable company. They've done clinical trials before. Okay, cool. So I was reassured going into it that this was a sound process.
Did they put a limit on how much they would help you?
No, there's nothing in the contracts that says anything about limits. I started with the reaction that started within an hour. So I got the injection and tingling went down the same arm as my injection. So kind of that feeling like when you fall asleep on a limb and it's
Yeah.
that numb, tingling, heavy sensation. That's what it felt like. And then it moved to my other arm and then it moved to my legs. And now, still 4 years later, I have that painful tingling sensation surging through my body 24/7. The last thing I feel when I go to sleep, it's the first thing I feel before I even open my eyes in the morning. It's what wakes me up every morning. Anyway, so that started within an hour, and that's still like a horrific symptom that I have to this day. But in the next 2.5 weeks, I landed in the ER 4 times with limb weakness, severe tachycardia, bradycardia, syncope. And I ended up being admitted to the hospital when my legs weren't working and I was incontinent. So,
oh my God.
This all was in a 2.5 week span. I had more than 20 symptoms pile on, things that I had never experienced before in my life. And so I went from a previously healthy mother of two to, completely bedbound, not even sure if I was going to survive to the next day. And
Was the hospital questioning what really happened? Did they think you might have had COVID instead? I know that's a common thing to think. People say, I don't think there's vaccine injuries. That person must have had COVID and they didn't know.
yeah, they thought at the beginning that it was COVID that did all this. And they kept testing me for COVID. I was tested for COVID over 12 times, including a spinal tap. They were
Wow.
looking for anything, right? They were looking for reactivated viruses. They were looking for everything and anything. And every single one of those tests came back negative. So they couldn't figure out what actually did it because they weren't willing to accept what caused the cascade of symptoms to pile on, right? So even they were afraid at that time to be willing to even fathom the concept that maybe there was a flaw with the vaccines that they themselves were going to be taking within the next, few weeks or a month.
So this is 2020.
Oh yeah. So I got my shot November 4th, 2020.
Okay.
And so this is all through November of 2020.
Were doctors already scared to report vaccine injuries because like later that definitely happened? Were those seeds already being sown in the background of anything but that?
It looked like that was definitely the case for my case, but then of course now I've met tens of thousands of others and it's the same for all of them. And
Wow.
if you end up in a big corporate healthcare system, the gaslighting is way worse than if you go to a smaller independent type facility.
Yeah, that's very consistent with like Lyme and all these kind of things that the government doesn't want us to be talking about the truth of. That
Yeah.
is really, really consistent with my experience as well. Okay, so you were hospitalized, and at what point did the hospital ever acknowledge that it was, or did AstraZeneca or or the FDA or NIH, did anybody get involved at that point? Did you communicate with them and say, this is what's going on? I need help. Or I know your husband is a scientist. I would imagine he was very involved in your case and advocating for you. Were they
Yeah.
contacted and what did they do?
Yeah. So my husband has a PhD in chem and biochem, and he right away identified that this was an immune upset. And he started looking into the long COVID groups right away, looking at what the latest science was there. There was even a clinical trial already moving on IVIG that happened in Italy, IVIG with COVID. And so he took a whole bunch of literature into the ERs when we would go and into the hospital when I was there staying, and literally was begging them to just look at the literature that he had found. And these weren't just random blog posts. I mean, these were peer-reviewed publications talking about vaccine adverse events, potential for Guillain-Barré, chronic demyelinating issues. And then he also was looking into there was a couple of papers put out from Germany that talked about molecular mimicry from the vaccines. And that was very cutting edge back then. Molecular mimicry, it was originally postulated by Harold Preuss, who's out of the Charité Hospital in Berlin.
Mm-hmm.
And he postulated that, look, you're using the most neurotoxic portion of the spike protein
right.
to be encoded with the mRNA and the adenoviral vector vaccines, right? And so he said, we're seeing a slew of problems in COVID with long COVID people dealing with brain fog and cardiovascular issues. And he's like, I'm pretty sure you're going to see the exact same thing from the vaccines because you are using the neurotoxic component of the spike to be created everywhere in the body. So he put that out in an editorial. And so the concept is molecular mimicry. So what the body is doing is it's supposedly fighting off just that portion of the spike when it's generated, but some immune systems, and theoretically this is what's going on in my case, the immune system, instead of teaching itself to defend against just that portion of the spike protein, it's also trained itself to attack portions of the nervous system where the cells look eerily similar to the spike protein. So these are neurons that are all over in your body. They're in your brain. They surround your gut. They're all over. They surround the peripheral nerves. So even touching your hands everywhere. So if your immune system finds those cells that are everywhere in your body, if your immune system identifies those as an invader, and it's going to attack those, you got a problem.
This is like autoimmune. This is what that really actually is when you think about it. So it sounds like, from what you're saying, the vaccine caused a neurologic injury. And I imagine you are one of many who have neurological issues from the vaccines and from the virus. This is something that is not being talked about really at all. There was even like a large analysis, I think it was in South Korea, of older people who got the mRNA vaccine, and they had a much higher rate of dementia and neurocognitive dysfunction. We're not allowed to talk about these things.
It's wild. At the beginning, I thought I was the only one. I really genuinely thought I was one in a million.
I understand that.
Yeah, you do.
Very isolating.
It is. It's very isolating. As time went on and the public rollout began in December and January of 2021, February 2021, then, there were a whole lot of healthcare workers that started coming out and quietly trying to find others dealing with the same issues. And it was crazy because I had my injury very, very well documented with several ER visits at the beginning. And I was tracking all the symptoms even through December, January, how they were progressing, regressing. Then all of a sudden these other people pop up and they are describing the exact same thing that I had.
They're describing it to you, or are they describing it
describing it to me. So they're describing their experience to me, right? And I'm like, oh my gosh, this is exactly what happened to me.
Yeah.
And then you replicate that by thousands of times. And now here we are 4 years later, where people still are coming to us and they're reporting what's going on with their bodies. And at this point, we're like, yep.
Is it pretty common that, for you, it was almost instantaneous, it sounds like. Is it common that it's like that? Or is there often a latency period where people feel fine after the vaccine, just kind of like with COVID or with chronic Lyme? Like you could feel fine for even months, and then boom, you wake up one day and you have all these weird new symptoms that are scary. Is that something that happens with vaccine injuries?
It's kind of interesting because, not to fast forward, but at react19.org, that's the nonprofit that we've started to help advocate for people that are suffering with adverse events. And we have 36,000 people there. And so it's an incredible group that we're able to go and ask these types of questions to.
Yeah.
So we've done several surveys. We have one that's actually going into the peer-reviewed literature. We'll be submitting a paper soon. But we've got one study that's got 1,200 people in there. And we asked them, okay, when did the symptoms start? And 65% of the people state that it started within the first 48 hours.
Mm.
So,
That's
yeah.
damning for the people who say this must have been a latent COVID infection. You must have been exposed a few days and you must have become symptomatic coincidentally the day of your
Yeah.
vaccine. That's extremely offensive, I'm sure, for you to hear
Oh,
that.
yeah. Look, like I've had COVID since.
Mhm.
I got COVID finally in 2022.
Mm.
I had not had COVID up until that point, which is why, institutes like the National Institutes of Health, Mayo, several lead research institutions were doing studies on this with the people that had never had COVID. Like I said before, even with the spinal tap. And once again, we asked our group, hey, how many of you had COVID before your vaccine injury? 75% of them had never had COVID.
Wow.
So what's really interesting about this group, we all took the social distancing, the masking, we took it so seriously. There's luck in there too, but we were so good at it.
You're in a trial to try to help prevent, because you were probably told that this would prevent disease. So you're trying to protect yourself. You're being told it's going to protect your family and your loved ones and you're a teacher and your students. So you're doing this with the best intentions, but under
Correct.
completely false premises because they did know. Well, they knew before they came out that they weren't going to stop transmission, didn't they?
Yeah, they did. And that was really, really disheartening, for all of these people that have made this quote unquote sacrifice. We essentially sacrificed our lives and our livelihoods for the advancement of this technology.
Yeah.
And just because we ended up on the wrong side of the outcomes, now instead of helping us and understanding these issues, what's the etiology here? We're being character smeared instead. So it's so unscientific when we all signed up for an objective scientific process.
Well, what strikes me is that you're not being smeared internally by the CDC, the NIH, the FDA. They all know what's going on, and they were even communicating with you through this whole process from the beginning. So,
Yeah.
where the smears are coming from, where do you think that is really? And who's doing it?
That's what's interesting, right? I mean, it doesn't take a whole lot to put together a campaign where people will say catchy things. They will go after people if they think that this is, some kind of dangerous motive. There's been a lot that's gone on over several decades, starting with the tobacco, a big tobacco. And they learned a lot from that process about how they lost. And those really big companies from big tobacco just hopped over to big food. There's several of those that moved over and created what we call big pharma now. And they've just been pushing and refining their craft with billions of dollars to make sure that when the time comes, they have that machine for their propaganda.
That's right.
Ready to go.
They have like whole pamphlets and stuff. I've seen some of this stuff where they give you talking points about how to talk and spin the conversation. So if somebody says, I'm against sugar. Well, you're hurting poor kids. You obviously are an elitist jerk that doesn't care about poverty. No, that's not at all what I'm saying. But some people will see that headline and believe it. That's the problem, is that it works. These things work. They're highly effective tools at neutralizing, in their own words, they call it neutralizing people who are a problem, like you, like me. Right. We're problems.
Well, and that's why I don't think people realize how easy it is for us all to fall into their trap and not realize it. We can, it's something that sounds really good, safe and effective sounded great. And we all wanted that to be the truth. And in reality, there's a whole lot of nuances to that safe and effective that if anybody questioned, they were going to make sure that those people that questioned it were definitely not taken seriously. So, but yeah, like you said, I mean, the government themselves, they were singing a very different tune to us individually, which was astounding.
What was the process? So you get this terrible, obvious injury. It's acknowledged that it's from the vaccine. There's nothing else. You've ruled out COVID a million ways. Who do you report it to specifically, and what are they saying and what are they doing?
Well, at the beginning of this, my husband was the one running most of this because I was trying not to die at this
Yeah,
point. So in January of 2021, so if you think about back where you were at that time, the vast majority of the world had yet to even get one dose.
that's right.
And we noticed that AstraZeneca was marketing to the US like, hey, just hold up. You guys don't want to get Pfizer and Moderna. We're coming, and ours is even better than theirs. And there was absolutely no mention of any severe side effects. So my husband called BS and reported them to the National Institutes of Health. That was January 11th, 2021. That same day, because of that report, the NIH started a study on neurological side effects to all of the COVID vaccines. So Pfizer, Moderna, J&J. I was the only one from AstraZeneca that participated in that trial.
How many people were in this trial?
They claim that there was 24. I know for a fact there were way more. We alone sent them anywhere from 70 to 100 people.
And this is early days, right? So
this was early. Yeah.
I mean, because I know a lot of people with neurologic injuries that never reported them to anyone and never got any help with them at all. And I know people who had irretrievable injuries, strokes, things like that, where it was misattributed or it was quietly attributed to the vaccine. And sorry, you took one for the team and get another one. Maybe it'll go away. I mean, seriously, that kind of stuff. It's crazy.
Yeah.
Craziest stuff I ever saw. Okay, let's just say 100 people in the study. Was the study disclosed to the public?
That's what's interesting about this. They threw this out on a preprint server very quietly, but it was after we had to make a lot of noise. So they flew us all out. So I was there at the NIH headquarters in Bethesda, Maryland, studied for 8 days. They did all the testing. They did diagnostics. And they gave me diagnoses. So I was diagnosed from the NIH with post-vaccine neuropathy.
Are you like literally living in a hospital at NIH? Do you stay there?
Yeah, I've got photos of me in the hospital bed and
okay, because I don't think people realize that they have a little hospital there. I don't think that's a commonly known fact.
Yeah.
Crazy. So at the highest level of government and public health, they are completely aware. And are they saying, wait a minute, we don't know if this is from the vaccine. We're not sure.
There was not a single mention to any participant that I've communicated with that was in the NIH study that was told that it was not the vaccine.
Wow.
There was never like well, it could have been this thing that happened to you. It could have been this car accident. It could have been, mold exposure. There was none of that. It was, okay, this is what's happened to you. Here's, we want to know exactly what the extent of the damage is. And they collected all that information. And it was the first time, because I went in June of 2021, it was the first time in months that I had been validated. It was at the lead research institution in this country with taxpayer dollars. And just to expound on this a little bit more, this was under Anthony Fauci. So this was his department at the NIH that was flying this out. It wasn't just some low-level mid-management research team.
He knew.
Oh, he absolutely. Yeah, he did. And there was an email string that came out through a FOIA that confirmed that Francis Collins and Tony, because they never put him down as Fauci, they just called him Tony, and this research team that's directly under Tony were talking in depth about whether or not to publicize the study once the findings were uncovered. And as we all know, they didn't publicize it.
One of the things that I wanted to tell you is I have an old friend who works in pharma. She's a rep, not for any of these specific companies. She was at a cocktail party over the summer of 2021. There were a bunch of reps that were at this cocktail party, and I will never forget her telling me that the J&J rep, that there were a couple of people from J&J, there was a publicist and there was a sales rep, and they were joking that they would never get the J&J, that nobody in J&J got J&J because it was so dangerous, that they all got other vaccines. They got Pfizer mostly, which ended up to be its own debacle. The other thing that they said is that the publicist's sole role all day was spent on getting any negative reports taken down from social media. So she would just report them to whatever powers it be, at Facebook, at Twitter, at Instagram, and they would get taken down.
Yeah.
within the day.
People that have problems with the COVID vaccines, they think that the mRNA technology is death to life. And, but I don't think they've looked at the clinical trial data, because the J&J data and the AstraZeneca data shows like twice as many adverse events just in the clinical trial data.
And those are similar vaccines, we should say.
Yeah.
They were very similar to each other. So, and they're both gone from the market as of now and have been for a long time. What was the party line when they pulled AstraZeneca?
They said that they didn't trust AstraZeneca's data. And so they basically told them, you guys need to start your entire clinical trial over because we don't trust it. So, and I mean, what are they going to do? Because I wasn't the only one that reported my injury from the trials. There was another woman I know for sure that reported a very similar injury to mine, and then AstraZeneca was pulled off the market 9 days later in the US.
Wow. And you think it was because of you guys?
I would suspect so. The timing is pretty coincidental.
But they still released it in other countries.
Yep. I mean, the work that we did at that time was in the US. So, that's where our reach was. When it was really scary for me to know that what happened to me was going to happen to other people not in the US. I was really worried about people in third world countries getting it. It's really heartbreaking to know that, but we did what we could. I feel good knowing that AstraZeneca was not unleashed in the US. It would have gone the same way as J&J, and the amount of deaths in young healthy people that the UK is now dealing with from the AstraZeneca vaccine, it speaks for itself.
Is that true? Is there a large?
There's a lot. Yeah.
Really?
Yeah. So the US has, there's reported deaths, but the deaths in the UK, they basically equal what's gone on in the US as far as deaths, with a far smaller population.
That is horrifying. And you think a lot of that is due to the AstraZeneca vaccine?
Yeah, AstraZeneca was the golden child in the UK, right? Because it was an Oxford product. While they were propping up Pfizer and Moderna in the US as the golden child that was going to save us all, in the UK, they were doing that with AstraZeneca. And it's interesting, if you actually look at the post-market surveillance that went out globally, Japan's approach has been very different from the US. The US has been very different from several countries in Europe. In Europe, there's several countries that have banned the mRNA from being administered in almost every single age bracket. In Europe, you can't even give the COVID vaccine to children, period. And for some reason in the US, it's safe for everybody. It doesn't matter your age. If people actually expanded their knowledge even just a little bit beyond how the US government has been managing the situation, they would find all of these clues that would show, like in the European Union, they have tinnitus and paresthesias on the product label for Pfizer. And in the US, they still won't even consider, tinnitus or paresthesias.
Really?
Yeah.
I mean, so Gregory Poland, who's like a huge vaccine researcher, everybody in the field knows who he is. He's very, very well known. He got a crippling case of, I'm telling you this, you already know this, I'm sure, of tinnitus. And then there was actually an article on Medscape, I think, a few years ago, okay, where there was a huge rash of people with tinnitus. His was extremely severe. And I remember reading that he said he got another mRNA to try to calm it down, which I thought was bonkers.
A lot of people have done that, believe it or not.
Does it?
30% of our population did that.
That's really something I will never, ever understand. Do you understand that? Did it resolve people's issues? No. Maybe I'm completely wrong.
It made every single person I have talked to that had a problem with dose 1 and went and got dose 2, they just got worse with dose 2. And there's several people where it killed them. Dose 2 killed them. You got to remember that nobody was fully vaccinated without 2. And the doctors were pressurizing people like crazy to get them. And so people really were, okay, I got to trust the medical professionals. I got to trust the science. I got to go get this done so I can be fully protected. Maybe it wasn't the vaccine. Maybe it was some weird ingredient in the chocolate I ate that night. There's so much that can go into questioning and not trusting your own intuition. And
Yeah.
the only reason I know that is because I myself obviously fell into that, right? Like at the beginning, the doctors were like, well, if AstraZeneca isn't helping you, then we don't know what to do with you. And it must not be from the vaccine then. And so they were convincing me that it was anxiety, right? That this
Wow.
pins and needles that now has been confirmed, small fiber neuropathy, post-vaccine neuropathy, just so everybody is aware. But, like I fell into that too. Like I went to a psychiatrist and I was like, hey, I've never, ever been on a psych med before in my life. But this is horrific. I just need some help to make it stop. And he looked at me, did a full neuro exam because he was board certified in neurology. And he said, I don't know what this is. This is not a psych condition.
It's just regular old doctors that are telling you that it's in your head, but it's not coming from the NIH. That's the thing. Tony
Right.
Fauci is not saying to you, put this girl in the psych bucket. You're
Yeah.
hearing from them. This is a real thing. We're aware of it. We know we're trying to help you guys. Come fly to NIH. We'll treat you in our hospital with our own clinicians. But then you go to the local hospital or your local doctor or institution and they say, we don't believe you.
Yeah. And it all changed after that NIH visit. Everything changed. I actually got apologies from several of my physicians here.
Were they
at home.
contacted by NIH?
Yeah. So the NIH, I told them, I was like, the NIH is happy to talk to you about my case. So of course they're like, oh, I'm going to prove this girl wrong. And so they called and they're like, oh. So what's really unfortunate about this is the treatment that I got at the NIH, the information that the NIH gathered on us, the world should have known.
Yes.
Every single person that was suffering any adverse event to a COVID vaccine should have been met with doctors in the ERs that were equipped with the knowledge, even if it was limited, on what the NIH was doing, the therapies that they were using, because they literally took me from bedbound to being able to walk onto the plane when I was going home.
Wow.
They were already aware of neurological reactions to vaccines in general. They already had several protocols that would be useful. And
so they had kind of like proprietary stuff. So just so I understand, they know this is going on. It's not so rare. They have treatments that can help people, but they didn't disclose this to the general public or to generally physicians.
No official communication, no press release, there's so much that they should have done. And I think that had they done that, that really would have prevented the disaster that we're in now, where people don't trust health agencies, period. Right? Because they do not have any nuance to the conversation. It's very black and white. And then if you don't do it, you got to line up and get your shot and shut up. Right?
I don't know a single doctor that would ever trust another public health recommendation. And I'm talking about mainstream as you get, the big time champions of every bad COVID policy. They are all done with this whole entire system.
Yeah. Dr. Nath, so Avendra Nath, Nath, if you look up his publications that he did through 2021, 22, and 23, he wrote 4 articles on neurological events from vaccines in general. The 4th one that he did, it was an editorial in Neurology, and that was in 2023. And he describes how important it is for doctors to take these types of issues seriously. And he talks about immunotherapy being really important. He talks about early intervention. And he also then touches on what should we learn from this, right? And he talks about how there is currently no task force under the government currently tasked with addressing vaccine harms and looking into treatments for vaccine harms. And he ends the editorial with a call for research and collaboration between governments and drug companies and health agencies and so on and so forth. But I think he was the lead on the study. And I think that was his way of like speaking out without like getting fired.
Did you feel he was on your side?
He was at the beginning. It was interesting because he still wanted the world to get vaccinated. He still thought COVID was worse, which if people believe that, that's fine. That doesn't bother me at all. I don't take that personally at all. That can be people's opinions, especially people that are really involved in the academics field.
But here's my question to you. Just because like they're two different things, right? COVID is bad. The vaccines have these risks.
Right.
Why would somebody like him, and I mean this earnestly, the vaccines we know don't mitigate the harms of the virus in terms of long-term chronic illness. Like we know that.
Yeah.
They don't stop transmission. Yes, in the beginning, I do believe that they stopped death and severe disease for a certain population. I think that's all been borne out, and we know that that's correct. But then after that, I don't know how somebody like him could say, because people were still getting the virus. And at some point, more people were dying that were vaccinated. And it wasn't just in
Yeah.
elderly people. I have a lot of friends who are healthcare workers. It was also a lot of young people. And my friends were positing that a lot of it was actually vaccine injury or vaccine injury combined with the virus. And they were
Right.
having ADE,
Yes.
antibody dependent enhancement. I will also say that we were finishing our book at the time that the pandemic started, and we delayed the publication. And we were in touch with people at the White House. We were in touch with medical people who worked in the government, very high level people whose names people know, who said that they were very carefully watching, nervously watching. Tony Fauci was mentioned, Deborah Birx was mentioned.
Right.
They were very concerned about the possibility of ADE.
Mm-hmm.
And then we never heard another thing about it. And I thought that was really weird too.
Yeah, I think that the ADE needs to be investigated. I guarantee you there's some data somewhere on that.
I was told that it was a very strong possibility to
Yeah.
likelihood that that would happen.
Right.
Like, how do you even like get your head around?
For me, it's been like a slow drip because it was my life, my body, my experience, my firsthand lived experience.
Yeah.
Right. And it was one day at a time because at the time I was still trying to survive. I was trying to figure out like if this during the time that the NIH study started, I was still shaky, weak, frail, unable to sleep well. And it was a survival mode where I was still in this place where I was like, if I can just figure out how to sleep, then I can survive this. Right.
Yeah.
And that's what I would do every single day. I'd look at my watch and I'd say, okay, I can live for 5 minutes. And I would just breathe for 5 minutes through the painful electrical sensations. And then,
Wow.
okay, all right, I made it 5 minutes. I can make it 5 more. And I would do that all day until, I finally couldn't take it anymore. And then my husband would give me a bunch of meds so I could go to sleep. And then the sleep meds would work for like 2 hours. Right. So it was a brutal warfare going on in my own body. And then trying to fight for my own survival. We pushed all of this with the government, and the government took a lot of it on. And it's not until, like a year after I got out of this acute, really desperate stage physically, where I was finally able to take a seat back and just look at the damage, look at all of the people exactly like me that barely made it out alive and what the government did. And they collected all of this information and then they kept it for themselves,
Wow.
even though they promised us that they would disclose this to the public. That's the most upsetting part about this.
Who promised you specifically?
So on my last day at the NIH, Dr. Savavi, who's one of the study doctors, and Nath came into my room on the last day, and they stood at the foot of my hospital bed and they said, we know that you're probably talking with some of your friends online about this study. We need you to not talk about the study. We need you to just hang on, just be quiet about it. We will disclose these findings ourselves, and then all of these people will be able to get help. So, and at that point, they had pulled AstraZeneca off the market. They had been helping hundreds of people privately.
So you met some of these other people, yes, I presume.
So when I was at the NIH, they brought in people like 2 by 2, which is kind of fun.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, so they brought us in 2 by 2. So there was one other person in person there. And then I talked to someone else that had just left and someone else that was going in just after me.
I see. So, but over time, you would say there were hundreds or thousands of people that were treated there. Is that?
For sure, hundreds. So, but what's interesting is they didn't bring everybody out, right? So there were several people. So Maddie DeGarry, she's an injured 12-year-old.
Yeah.
She was injured in the clinical trials. the literally in the clinical trial report, she's coded as functional abdominal pain.
She couldn't eat anymore. We should talk a little
She,
about her symptoms because
yeah,
that
so
case
she,
was horrifying.
exactly. So she had multiple seizures. She has a permanent feeding tube installed to this day. She is confined to a wheelchair and she has severe nerve pain, numbness all the way up to her belly button. You know, that's not a tummy ache.
What did they know? What were they saying privately? I know the public stance on her. It enraged me so much when I saw it. And I know a lot of pediatricians and doctors who know deeply about this case who just think it is like an atrocity, like a total crime.
Yeah. So I have seen all of her medical records, and the trial hospital definitely screwed her over. They put FND, which is it's in your head. They put it on her chart literally the same day that they submitted the papers to the FDA to be licensed.
People should know that
He was
FND was
literally,
historically known as hysteria. Just want
yeah,
to say that. Yeah.
literally, she was literally in their hospital at that time.
NIH was treating her for severe vaccine injury, and they were
So
telling the public she was crazy.
yeah, so the government actually hasn't made a public statement on her, but Pfizer has, and Pfizer's hospital has. And I say Pfizer's hospital because Pfizer was paying the hospital to run the study, and they have given the PI in that study, who was directly over Maddie in her clinical trial, they've given him a boatload of money, and he's the main author on the Pfizer clinical trial report for the kids trial. It's insane.
So what did that do to distort his findings, if that's what you are saying?
Yeah, so they showed that the clinical trial for the kids 12 to 18-year-olds was like insanely safe and effective, right? Because look, there's a little stomach ache, and there's this other kid that has like a headache, right? There was no seizures, tremors, gastroparesis, paralysis with the numbness and the tingling that went up to her belly button. So they didn't treat her, right? They bullied her. They took away her wheelchair, actually, and they made her drag her legs across the floor because they figured she'd just get tired of it and get up and walk.
Stand up. This is a similar case to something that in the Lyme community that's a well-known case of Julia Brzeze. This is sick. This is making me physically ill. Yeah.
It's disgusting.
Yeah.
Yeah. So she spent several years literally trying to get help. We connected the hospital doctors to the NIH. The NIH did get involved in her case. They did validate her issues with the research doctors. And they said, okay, here's all the testing that you need to do. And the hospital did all the testing, and then they didn't follow up with the NIH after that. So the NIH doctors were engaged and willing to help her, but the study doctors paid by Pfizer were not willing to engage. So it was,
Wow.
And that's all the dog and pony show with all of these guys, right? But why play that kind of game with a 12-year-old girl's life? And as soon as I realized that they're willing to do this to kids without even flinching, that's when I understood that this is a game that has nothing to do with humanity, has nothing to do with illness and preventing people from getting COVID. There's something far bigger and nefarious.
What do you think it is?
I really, at the very end of the day, I really think it's greed combined with fear. People really, 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 really wanted the COVID vaccines to be a success. And at the end of the day, they weren't. And in the corporate eyes, they have blanket immunity. So you can't sue, period, if you're injured by a COVID vaccine. There is absolutely no pathway in the United States to sue for liability. And you can't tell me that companies that have been dealt that have had to pay the biggest criminal fines in the history of the United States are the same guys that are going to be given blanket immunity and then play totally fair and totally nice with that immunity, right? They're not going to. They're going to exploit until they get caught. And now they have like this incredible barrier of protection.
I think a lot of people probably don't know this either. There is a vaccine court in the US. So these were under EUA. So I don't actually know, was that like where you would go even? Is there something separate? And did anybody sue and win? Like, where are we with
They
this?
have separated out the COVID vaccine injured from the typical process. So, and they have assured the public that there's this program called the CICP. So if there's an issue, you can file in the CICP. It's all good. The CICP to date has paid $446,000 total to Americans harmed by COVID vaccines. They have an outlier payment for $2.5 million that's pending, but it's not actually like they're going to write a check. It's a trust. And so the family's going to have to go.
400,000.
400,000 is what we're sitting at right now.
What were they even, do you even know about I mean, it's so insulting to hear that.
Yeah. So, and they've gotten in a lot of hot water for that abysmally low number. So you are not allowed legal representation, which is a violation of your constitutional rights, for one. You have 1 year to file. You have no idea what the process is. You don't know who's reviewing your claim or why, what resources they're using. And you're only allowed, I want to say it's like $50,000 a year for lost wages, no pain and suffering. That's another constitutional violation. So, and you do not get a fair jury trial. There is no impartial judge involved. So essentially what they're doing when they are requiring healthcare workers to still get COVID vaccines is they are putting all of the risk on the individual taking the product. There is zero risk or liability or accountability whatsoever for the government or the drug companies. It is 100% on the consumer. And that's something I don't think people realize until they're on this end of the fence, looking, back and going, crap, what do I do? Well, you can file in this, little program that's taxpayer funded, by the way. It's not even funded by the drug companies. So funded by the taxpayer, and you'll be lucky if you can get anything at all, because it has a 98.5% rejection rate, and they won't tell you why. So for example, I just got my official CICP rejection letter this week, and my well-documented NIH confirmed vaccine injury, even that does not satisfy the causal relationship requirement needed for the CICP program.
What would one need?
Apparently you need mountains of studies. The reason why they're going after the J&J payout for 2.5 million is because J&J was pulled off the market. And so they're looking for government approved side effects. So J&J can cause severe clots and kill people. And so okay, we'll talk about that one.
So this is a narrow, you're allowed to talk about these bad things within a narrow scope, but we can't talk about the brain injuries. We can't talk about sudden deaths. We can't talk about miscarriages. Is that kind of true?
Yeah. So it's literally myocarditis and severe clotting. That's all that they'll allow in this program. So, and just to back up a little bit with React 19 and the surveys we've done, only 4% of our membership has been diagnosed with myocarditis. So that's 96% of the people that are claiming to be injured by COVID vaccines in the United States that don't even have a chance.
What are the most prominent injuries that you're seeing within your group?
The most prominent is neurological. Secondary is cardiovascular. And the majority of the membership is women of childbearing age.
Mm-hmm. It's always us, isn't it?
The cardiovascular events, by and large, it's similar because it mirrors COVID in this way, where it's men that get the cardiovascular sudden events. Not saying women don't, but it's a higher rate of men that get the cardiovascular. Mm-hmm. And then for women, it's primarily neurological and autoimmune, which, points back to this being immune in nature at the beginning. And so that's what we keep trying to point back to for people is it's immune, it's inflammatory. And so if we're going to stop some of these injuries from overrunning people's lives, that's where we keep focusing on is what's going on with the immune system. How can we curb if it's innate immunity or adaptive immunity that's being triggered? And then also, how can we bring down the inflammation?
Back to the episode in a second, but first, let me ask you to please sign up for my Substack newsletter. It's free, it's packed with hope and information that I think is so important for you to know. Join now at danaparish.substack.com. Okay, let's get back to the show. What would you say are the most prominent neurologic injuries? Because I think, again, people hear this and it's sort of this theoretical thing, but they don't really understand the hard truth of what that means to wake up in that body. What does it look like?
So for most people, it's dysautonomia is super high on the list.
And that is what? What are the symptoms of that?
Dysautonomia, it affects almost every single system in your body, if not every single system. Dysautonomia is basically rooted with your vagus nerve and your immune system and your nervous system all firing off. So your nerves surround your heart, your nerves surround your gut, your nerves are all over in your brain, obviously, right? So there's not a millimeter of your body that does not have some kind of nerves moving through them. So when those are not functioning right, when they are not signaling to your legs to contract the blood vessels and the muscles around them to push to tighten so the blood goes up to your brain, you're not going to get oxygen up to your brain. Your gut is not going to be told to process food correctly. Your heart is not going to be told to beat a certain rate when you're laying down versus when you're upright, beat a different rate so you don't pass out. I mean, it affects everything. And all of those things firing off, you're going to have massive pain. You're going to have massive brain fog. You're going to probably maybe pass out or almost pass out. Your ears can be ringing, which is another big one.
Yeah.
And then you also, because your circulation just from your blood is restricted and the oxygen saturation body wide is not happening correctly, you're going to end up with pins and needles, burning, itching, numbness, limb weakness, so it's difficult to explain, but it's basically like a bomb goes off in your body. It's no longer yours. You no longer have control over it.
Mm-hmm.
And then it's a mad race to figure out how you can just figure out how to regain control of any of those systems.
Is there a difference between what we think of and know as long COVID versus vaccine injury?
Yeah, there's a little bit of research going on now that's looking into that between what we do at React 19 with the University of Maryland, Baltimore. We're doing a study to try to identify what those slight differences are. Mm-hmm. And Yale with Harlan Krumholtz and Akiko Iwasaki are really trying to dig into that with minimal funds. So if there's anyone out there that wants to support this, it'd be incredible to, support the independent research that they're doing there. But what it's looking like is there is actually a very significant overlap between long COVID and COVID vaccine injury, which makes sense because the spike protein is identical, especially with the alpha variant. But there is a little bit of a variation, and there is a signature to the syndromes, which Yale is working on, putting out a paper on that right now. So hopefully we'll have the answer to that very soon.
Do you have just a sense of it yourself, just hearing so many of these stories? Are there ways to kind of tease it out if you're confused yourself?
Yeah, like if people have an overlap of both, which there are quite a few people that do, there's a higher likelihood that you end up with a neuropathy after the vaccine, which makes sense because with COVID, it's going through the nose and it's going through, all of these different immune defenses before it gets watered down and then it goes through your system. With the vaccine, it's getting shot straight into your arm. So those codes to make the spike protein are going straight into your veins. And then it's got a straight shot to everywhere where your immune system is going to get targeted. And we've seen those with previous vaccines, with the HPV vaccine, even the Hep B vaccine, the MMR vaccine. When you actually look at the product inserts, which I didn't do until I was injured, you will see small fiber neuropathy, seizures, MS, Guillain-Barré. Yeah. And these are all neurological, conditions that, like you think of MS and you think of, like a middle-aged woman, right?
Right.
I couldn't imagine that happening to a kid. So this class of illnesses that are triggered by vaccination in general, I think it'd be really, really, really important for us to research why that's happening, what's actually triggering that in the body, see if we can offset that so we can reduce the risk of these permanent conditions from happening after vaccination.
I mean, there's a lot of research being done on COVID and long COVID. So, what's the problem? Why are we not looking at this more fully?
It's a really good question. And the answer is very simple. It's not convenient for the vaccination gods to be funding the research for that. There is no funding available for COVID vaccine adverse events or other vaccine adverse events. The funding that is going into that, we have to hunt down, and we look really, really hard for it. But I really genuinely believe that putting funding into researching this is going to be the key to restoring vaccine confidence in people. People want to know. There's enough people that have met people that have problems with the COVID vaccines. They want to see it on paper, what's going on. They don't want to be gaslit anymore with these, like pharma funded studies that are like, hey, it's fine. Everything's fine. Just go get it. COVID's so much worse. COVID is terrible. Just go get your shot. And that's not the questions people are asking. People are not asking, is the vaccine worse or is COVID worse? That's not right. What's causing vaccine hesitancy. I've long believed that vaccine hesitancy is not caused by misinformation. Vaccine hesitancy is rising because of not enough information.
Not enough information. And then what was put out about these specific vaccines is really, they were just lies. A lot of it was just not true. And, I don't like these terms like pro-vax and anti-vax because I just think those are ridiculous terms made up by the government to sort of put people in these boxes. But I would say that aside, like the most pro-vax doctors that I know, they're disheartened by feeling misled. They feel duped. Their doctors, like they weren't allowed to critically think. They weren't allowed to report what they saw with their own eyes. I know doctors who were literally told in hospitals they cannot report vaccine injuries through VAERS because they didn't want their institution to be flagged. You weren't allowed to talk about it openly. It was literally hushed. I mean, I heard this so consistently.
For people that may be listening to this, and they're like, oh my gosh, this is just another, like people spreading conspiracies. It's like, no, we have heard this directly from the doctors in the hospital systems that are being dissuaded from reporting. We are hearing this directly from the people that are being affected by this in the mainstream media and the news, obviously working directly with the heads of the health agencies that are telling all of this and emailing this to us, directly. So this isn't some conspiracy. These are people's firsthand accounts of what is going on the front lines. And it's very different from the watered down narrative that people are allowed to talk about.
That's right. I also was told by multiple researchers that you can't be quoted in a national, magazine or newspaper about long COVID or anything resembling a question about the vaccine unless you promote the vaccines. Right. So I also asked some producers in news shows, and I also asked some editors at large publications, and they've verified that that is correct. It's just very disturbing because where do you go to find out the truth? I mean, I don't know that there is one source. I try to literally go to sources themselves. Right. I learned more today than I have in a long time in terms of the public outreach and the public proselytizing, basically propaganda campaigns that are going on around the vaccines. So specifically, were you in touch with people like Peter Marks, who runs the vaccine? I think he's head of biologics at FDA, or Janet Woodcock, who was the head of the FDA during this time. Did you speak to any of them, and what were they saying to you? Because I think they're the big, bold names we need to know what they knew and when.
Yeah. So in addition to what the NIH knew, the FDA also knew, and they were completely aware. We were working with Janet Woodcock as early as February of 2021. She was acknowledging that they're seeing all kinds of reports of neurological reports from the COVID vaccines, and they're looking into it. They keep reassuring us that they're trying to figure out how to communicate this to the public. In March of 2021, the NIH and the FDA are talking together with several drug company officials on these email strings copied. And they're saying there's already 1,000 neurological adverse events being reported in bears. Just give us some more time. Just give us a couple more weeks before you start publicizing this. We're working on putting the data together so we can disclose this.
So they're stringing you along. They're telling you, don't worry, we got your back. Just let us do this our way, and we'll take care of you.
Yep.
And then did they ever come out?
Nope.
Okay.
There's one study that came out on a preprint that was really watered down, and they basically stated that the therapies they gave us fixed us, which is not true, and they knew that that wasn't true. So that was the first thing. But yeah, so this battle with the FDA, it continued from basically February 21 through 2023. And we kept going back and forth with Peter Marks, who's the head of biologics. He's the guy that puts the rubber stamp of approval on the licenses for the vaccine. So he's the guy tasked with evaluating the safety and the efficacy of the vaccines. And he was very vague, but also very validating. He said over and over and over, there's no question that there's adverse events to the COVID vaccines. There's no question that this has happened to you and the people that you know. We just don't know what to do about it. So we pushed him on dysautonomia. We pushed him on POTS. We pushed him on autoimmunity. We pushed him on tinnitus. And we were pushing as hard as we could to get them to add issues to the product label. So the package insert, right? Like tinnitus and paresthesias, which is a side effect in Europe, but for coincidentally is not a side effect in the US.
Did they ever explain to you why they wouldn't put those in?
Well, they were like, well, it's not strong enough of a signal. That was the one thing that was frustrating.
Like Gregory Poland will tell him that's not true.
Yeah, well, and what's interesting is Gregory Poland, so he tried to advocate for tinnitus people, but shortly after that, something happened because he ended up being featured in a vaccine conference in Washington, D.C., and he's sitting right next to Peter Marks, and he's talking about how incredible the COVID vaccines are. While his ears are ringing, he's still going on and on.
What do you threaten somebody's family? Like, how do you get somebody to do that? I mean it with all my heart. I can't think of a number, an amount of money I would take to do that. I mean, you do hear from people that they do get threatened. There's, there's definitely some really nefarious stuff that goes on with all these big industries. But have you had any, I'm sure you've had a lot of backlash. Have you been threatened? Have you had any of this kind of scary stuff happen to you?
Yeah, for sure. There is no person out there that can state that they spoke out about their vaccine injury or about vaccine injuries and didn't come out with some kind of battle wound from that. There is always reprisal, and that's not accidental that it's set up that way.
Where are you getting it?
Everywhere. Yeah, people mailed stuff to our house. People have called my phone number and made threats to me and my kids. I mean, it's so when Fauci was crying to Congress about death threats that he received, I was livid because we also got all of that, but with no fancy security. And we ourselves are sick and fighting for our lives just on a cellular level. And we're also dealing with this politically polarized hate.
Did you lose any friends and family over this?
That's one thing that's kind of cool about the book, Worth a Shot. And I think a lot of people will resonate with that because there's several family members that I didn't appreciate until I was injured. And there's several family members that I don't talk to at all anymore now because of my injury. My entire family was largely accepting and loving and supportive until I spoke out, and then they either leaned in with me going public or they completely abandoned me. I have one brother that I can't sit next to anymore because even after my injury, we were at a family wedding and I was just hanging on, just sitting upright, right? Just being there. And he sat next to me and he goes, I think these COVID vaccines work really well. because I went and got my booster 2 days ago and things are going great. He ended up with COVID and it almost killed him, but I didn't say anything to him. He's never asked how we're doing. He's never asked how my kids are doing. And any, he's just dug into the narrative and that's it. So just like everybody else, this has definitely caused issues, different relationships. And there's not a single relationship that isn't tested after this happens. It's crazy how something as simple as a diagnosed medical condition can completely challenge relationships that you have with people, which I know that you've probably experienced the same thing.
I have. I am thinking about so many people that I know that lost marriages over being sick, and the husband or the wife, usually, unfortunately, because it affects women more prevalently, it's more the husband's leave, and they're being told that it's FND, that it's in the woman's head, and here they're like totally bedridden. They were like super mom, and then they're bedridden after a tick bite, and have all these, weird migrating symptoms, kind of similar stuff to what you guys go through, but it more migrates around. So you might have like severe neuropathy for a couple of months or a couple of weeks, and then all of a sudden it's joint pain. And then that goes away and it's all neuropsych. So you kind of feel crazy. I can say that from personal experience because how could this be happening to my body? Like I was completely okay and then this happened. And it is like a bomb goes off. And to add insult to injury, there are people who don't believe you. And worse is that the medical establishment is so ill-informed that they don't believe it is real for the most part. And then they convince your family members that you must be making it up, or you really just need psych meds, or you're anxious. So I personally was lucky that my family and friends did not react that way. Also, I was lucky too that I got a Lyme rash. Most people don't see it. So I had this whole cascade of events that happened directly, but I see it all the time. I've heard from so many patients over the years, and I still do. And I have these people in my inner circle, and they're still losing family members, including even their children who don't believe it. The pain and the suffering is so insurmountable. It's so hard to fathom and comprehend. I think the average person who hasn't been through something like this or seen it really up close, it's very hard to believe that you could be this strong, healthy, active, productive person. And in the blink of an eye, in a breath, it can all be taken away. It's hard to believe.
It's well said. I read a statistic somewhere, and believe it or not, this is 2 sevens, so I don't know if that's lucky or not, but 70% of marriages fail when a chronic illness pops into the picture. And that's like a high indicator of just how much stress that, just any chronic illness can put on a relationship. And the second statistic, which is derived from our partner organization in the UK CV Family, they help with COVID vaccine adverse events. They asked their membership how many of them had considered suicide because of their vaccine injury. And that answer was over 70%. I want to say it was 73%. So with the research that we've done at React 19, we have found that suicide ideation intention is incredibly high. I know it is, with other chronic illnesses as well. We asked people, where finding your emotional support? Where are you able to make it emotionally? What tools do you have? And believe it or not, supportive family and supportive friends is number one. Number two is actually supportive community. And a lot of those are supportive online communities, because a lot of people, once you're, shut out in your own home, you're not getting out into the neighborhood. You're not going to the dog park. It's vitally important. I can't emphasize this enough for anyone that is dealing with a family member that has a chronic illness to not forget about them, to continue to show up for them.
Yes.
Even if it's the same thing that you've heard a million times, like a broken record, the first line of defense in losing their life actually comes from their supportive family. And
I totally agree with you.
Yeah.
Amazing advice. I'm so glad you said that. I never get a chance to talk about that. But actually, when I think about it, I had a couple of people who emailed me almost every day and just said, "How are you?" That's it. Nothing else. And it was like a lifeline because I was so sick and I couldn't get out. And I had all these things I wanted to say about it. I'm married to a saint, and I think you probably are too. But
Yeah.
I didn't want to keep, over and over and over. He has got to hear the same stuff every day. But I needed another outlet just to get it out of my head, because it
Mhm.
was so mind blowing and it was so isolating.
Yeah.
So just that check-in to me was everything. And it carried me through. It carried me out. And it was very meaningful. I've talked about it many times. I had a lot of suicidal ideation and a
Same.
lot brand new anxiety and depression. I had never been medicated. And then all of a sudden I go through this and my brain is no longer my own. And the other part of it is that I think is important to say is that at least with a lot of infections, including COVID, including Lyme, they can inflame the brain. So you have a physiological reason. There's a biological reason for your depression, anxiety, psychosis, suicidal ideation. It's published in Lyme. You can actually find a study by Robert Bransfield, who is a psychiatrist at Rutgers, called Lyme and Suicide. And I think that with vaccine injuries, when you're talking about the spike and you're talking about all these neuroimmune reactions, neurological reactions, I can see the inflammatory response would be the same. I
Mhm.
mean, your body can only express itself in so many ways.
Yeah. No, you're absolutely right. It's kind of sobering to realize how much of an impact we can have on each other. Just because society is not doing the right thing, it doesn't
Yeah.
mean that we can't. So this is where I keep more than ever. I believe that we, the people, can find the solutions for these problems. We don't need to sit around and wait for the government to figure it out because they won't.
No, they
And
won't. They absolutely won't.
yeah, and there's enough people that are chronically ill in the US now where we are an incredible money train for somebody that wants to find the cure or some type of incredible therapeutic that incredibly, improves our quality of life. But we just got to get past the stigma, around these illnesses. These are just medical conditions. They don't
Yeah.
need to be politically polarized. They do not need to be used for some weird agenda.
Nor
We
should
should be
they
able
be.
to, yeah,
You should be ashamed of yourself if you are sitting around there judging people with vaccine injuries. Think about it. Sit down right now if you're one of those people, spend 15 minutes thinking about what you're saying and what you're doing and stop it. Disgrace. It's a total disgrace.
yeah.
Are there treatments? So we talked a little bit about your time at NIH. Are there treatments for vaccine injuries that need publicity that people need to know about to help them get better? Are there things that NIH was doing that was really helpful?
Yeah, the NIH was pushing on immunosuppression, immunomodulation.
Mhm.
So they had a study arm where people were getting steroids, and then they had another study arm where people were getting IVIG,
Mhm.
and they were asking everybody what else they were doing. They suggested at one time for me to go get monoclonal antibodies, which I
Mhm.
did, and that
Yeah,
actually helped. That was before I started IVIG, though.
I see.
And the monoclonal antibodies worked when they included the alpha variant of the spike protein in the
Mhm.
antibodies, which they don't do that anymore. And so they're
Mm.
not effective now. That's my own theory on why
Inter-
monoclonals don't work quite as
Interesting.
well. But
Interesting.
with that said, there's everything from diet modification, which by and large continues to be a consistent winner for people that are suffering, whether that's going full carnivore diet, low histamine, paleo diet. Those
Sure.
tend to be like the top ones. We can't quite figure out why carnivore diet would present the same kind of benefit as, a low histamine diet, but whatever.
I guess just
Yeah,
lowering inflammation. I'll take it any way I can, for sure. Red
exactly.
light, whatever.
Yeah, and the reason why that's so useful is because we've measured, the negatives of the treatment too, as well as the positives. And the risks with modifying the diet are incredibly low.
Yeah, exactly.
Exactly.
Yeah,
Yeah,
no, I agree.
exactly.
It was immensely helpful for me to do paleo and
Yeah.
it reduced my pain and my inflammation and joint pain and neurological symptoms very, very significantly, very quickly. So I'm glad you're talking about that.
Yeah, the other very simple one is meditation and just re-regulating the nervous system. But as you and I both know, when you're in the acute phase and your body is like really not well, that's not going to do anything. So you've got to, implement several other things that may work for people or they may not. But yeah, there's people doing stuff with red light therapy,
Yeah, I love red light.
grounding. Yeah. As far as immunomodulation, there's addressing MCAS,
Yeah.
which tends to help with people that don't even have an MCAS diagnosis. So H1, H2 blockers, resveratrol. There's several other ingredients, supplements that people can get to identify that. Vitamin D has been helpful for some people, but it's also been hurtful for other people. So that's once again, one of those things where, this is all stuff that needs to be monitored by a doctor. They need to be looking at your levels. Vitamin B12 being too low will aggravate people's neuropathy, but also vitamin B6 toxicity will aggravate people's neuropathy. Hormones has a big factor when women go through their cycle, and there's the extreme change that happens with the progesterone and estrogen balance that will really drive even healthy people to have mast cell degranulation. So there's a lot of people that are taking progesterone to try to help counter that balance. So to tamp down flares during the cycle, especially when people are on their periods, is when people's symptoms usually go haywire. And then of course there's like cryotherapy. So people will do stuff with cold baths, ice baths, cold showers. And that's supposed to help regulate and help retrain the vagus nerve, which is the biggest nerve that moves through your body. That'll help with breathing. It'll help with stress. It'll help with, being able to sit, to stand. And then there's the heavy hitting stuff, right? So there's, some antidepressants that are known to modulate neuroinflammation. There's other ones with clonidine, ivabradine, what's another, guanfacine, that are supposed to help with not being able to regulate your heart rate. Beta blockers have widely failed in our groups, our support groups. And then of course there's immune modulation. So steroids, which help for people temporarily, monoclonal antibodies that will target if you have high IL-10, IL-6, IL-8, there are monoclonal antibodies that will hit those inflammatory markers directly. And there's IVIG and rituximab and the big guns. And this, right? When people have been dealing with an issue for years, they've tried all of these things and they've failed. And then you end up going for the big guns just because you need some quality of life improvement,
And sometimes they work really well. IVIG with Lyme, it's a solid treatment with kids, especially. It can be really helpful with kids who have PANS and PANDAS, and that can be induced by infection. So yeah, it's important for people to know this. Where can they go for the help? Who can treat these conditions?
So at React 19, we've set up a underground network of doctors that are mostly mainstream allopathic physicians that are willing to treat these and experiment with the patients, because that's basically what it is, right? There's no protocols like in the medical lit for this at all. And so it's really just finding those doctors that are not going to gaslight you and are willing to try things here and there and see if they can help you get your quality of life back. So that's at react19.org. And if you're a provider and you want to hop on that network, it's confidential. And we're always looking for those doctors that are just patient with the patients and willing to kind of go through those steps, to help us get a little bit of improvement in our quality of life.
Do any of the doctors take insurance?
Yeah, most of them do. There's several that are cash pay, but most of them are insurance based, and they do this not to make money. It's really sad. A lot of them actually lose money on spending the time they do with these chronic care patients.
I bet.
And we're hoping that we can move in Washington a little bit to change that, right? So we can get better billing codes for complex care.
Yeah.
But yeah, right now it's really just a humanitarian mission.
That's one of the big obstacles to care, as you know, with complex chronic illness. So it's amazing to hear that there are doctors who are treating patients with insurance. Incredible. Yeah. And tell me about React 19's. You have raised quite a significant amount of money for patients who can't afford care. Because a lot of this stuff, even if the doctors take insurance, you're still going to have to pay for the red light treatment, the medications, the supplements, the HBOT, whatever it is you're going to do. So tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, so raising money for this is probably one of the most challenging arenas to raise money in.
Mm,
And we've been working as hard as we can over the last 3 years to raise money for people's out-of-pocket medical expenses.
yeah.
So to date, we have awarded $1.1 million in medical grants for out-of-pocket medical expenses. Now, when
Incredible.
people hear that number, they're like, hey, great, these guys are doing great. We don't, I don't need to help support them. But I cannot emphasize enough how challenging it has been to find each and every dollar. We have no corporate sponsorships. We have no big philanthropic contributors. It's all everyday donations. It's an average of $81.
Mm,
And as soon as the money comes in, there are at least 2 or 3 people that are waiting for the money to go out.
wow.
So the money comes in, we process the applications as soon as we can, and we get the money into the hands of the people that need it. But between the provider network and we call it the Care Fund, the medical
Mm,
grant program, an example of this in action is there was an 8-year-old that was in Virginia, totally healthy kid.
mhm.
She got vaccinated, ended up in diapers and a wheelchair. I
Oh,
think it was
no.
something similar to PANS and PANDAS.
What vaccine did
Um,
she have? Do you remember?
I believe it was Pfizer.
Mhm.
So she ended up being locked away at Johns Hopkins in the psych ward for 3 weeks, and she just got worse and worse.
My God.
And her mom found us online, and through several other parents that were also working with us, she was able to connect with a doctor on our underground network. And we were able to get her money through the Care Fund. So she then took her child out of the psych ward, which of course caused a whole scene, and DCFS was called and everything. But they weren't helping her daughter. They were just abusing her in there,
Oh, I
right?
believe it. I mean, our
So
book opened with this story of a kid with Lyme. It's the
yeah,
same playbook. It's
exactly.
the same
Yeah,
song, different verse. It's horrible.
exactly. So yeah, so we broke her out of the psych ward, transported her several states over to this doctor that was able to get her the therapies that she needed.
Mm.
And she walked into school that fall as if nothing had happened to her. So it was like a full reversal of her injury. So, but that was only possible because of the provider network and
It's
because of the Care
amazing.
Fund and the independent, contributions. And we actually took the mom with us to Washington, D.C. to testify to Peter Marks directly.
Yep.
She told him this horrific story about what happened to her daughter, how she almost lost her daughter for life, right? And I followed that up with the only reason this girl has her life back and she is now back in school is because we used the secrets from the NIH to get her better.
What did he say?
He said, there are no secrets here.
You're kidding me.
Literally, those are the words he said. There are no secrets here.
That's
Yeah.
just not true. No, I don't. I mean, you just gave a whole lot of information that I'm going to say a lot of people listening didn't know and really will appreciate and will follow up on. This is hard won knowledge and information, and you have a very proprietary set of data from your group. I mean, it's
Mm-hmm.
incredible what you have.
Yeah.
And I'm just curious, Brianne, you said that these public health officials were telling you, don't worry, just hold on, don't say anything. We're going to come out with it. Did they put any of this in writing? Did they email
Yeah.
this to you guys or text you or anything like
Yes.
that?
We have that in emails, and yeah, they definitely put it. And that's the other reason why it was so shocking that they, didn't follow through.
Is there anything
Because
you
like
could share, like specifically a note from Janet Woodcock, who pretty much single-handedly killed early treatment,
she really did. Let me
and
see if I can
Peter
find
Marks,
something.
who has just continued to be
So
public nuisance?
yeah, okay. So this one, March 17th, 2021, this has the NIH, FDA. So Janet Woodcock, Peter Marks, these are all people that are engaging on this, and they're emailing Dr. Denise Hertz, who she's injured.
Mm.
She's at
Oh, I
Rick.
read about her case. Yeah.
So she's an injured physician. So the NIH promised her, they said, I promise you,
I'm sorry, who's writing this specifically?
this is the NIH to her and the FDA. So Janet Woodcock,
Janet
I
Woodcock.
promise
Okay.
you. So this is the NIH sending this promise. I promise you, we will report your issue and other cases that we are reviewing now And I really appreciate if you kindly give us 1 to 2 weeks to collect comprehensive information before publicizing it. So
Wow.
that was March of 2021. And then Janet Woodcock, head of the FDA, this is in April of 2021. I will follow up on this immediately. This is about repeated reports of the adverse events. And then she says, the NIH says, I'm hoping to publish our information soon. And hopefully by that time, healthcare providers have a better idea what to do with these side effects, would be happy to help. Yeah. And then Janet Woodcock to me in June of 2021, like they're still going into the summer of 2021. And Janet Woodcock emailed me and she said, I'm actively looking into this and we'll see what I can do. The NIH is validating people's injuries throughout the summer of 2021. And then the NIH emailed me and said, maybe this issue has not received the deserved attention, but there are now an increasing number of publications and literature documenting the complications. The important message to get out is that they are treatable. So treat early or do it in the context of a clinical trial. So this is June 2021.
They're saying that it's treatable, but you're not getting better. I mean, you're getting somewhat better, but the implication is it's sort of sounds like she's saying it's more than treatable. It's like curable.
Yeah. So they were playing it down to us too, but not once did they say, well, could it be that sandwich that you had the same day?
That's important to point out.
Could
You're
it
right.
be mold? I mean,
Right.
like if you read the emails, it's very obvious that we're in a very in-depth. This is not a surface level conversation, right? Like we've already gone through the, hey, we're dealing with all these issues. Not once did they say, that's not what it is, sweetheart, right? Like not once.
Was Rochelle Walensky, who was the head of the CDC at the time, was she copied? Was she aware? Because she was a big TV person at the time, front page of the news saying, you know, these vaccines stop transmission. We have new CDC data and they stop long COVID and you're not going to get infected. You know, they all kind of did this. So I'm just trying to understand who knew what, when.
Well, yeah. So Walensky knew, she was copied on all these emails. She just never replied. So there was like the head of the FDA, the heads of the NIH, and the CDC heads all on these email communications together, right? So, but then here's another, July 2021, the NIH confirms they believe these symptoms to be real. So the NIH says, sorry to learn of your continued symptoms. We believe the symptoms to be real. That is the reason we have been treating patients. So, but then the NIH continues to state that they never had a study. They were never treating patients, right? And then, so at the CDC vaccine director is Tom Shimbukuro, which I'm sure you've heard that name before.
Well, I saw what he said to that patient who.
Yeah, so there was an injured scientist that had identified the tinnitus safety signal, and this was over the summer. This is July 2021 again, and the vaccine team asked Tom, Dr. Shimbukuro, what he wanted to have done with the safety signal that's been identified, and he said thank him for his email and cut him off. So
I will never forget that. A lot of people sent me that clip. That was a game changer for me, just to understand what was really going on behind the scenes and how much they were covering up. And then there was another thing I wanted to ask you about, this FDA slide. And it was like a flash. It was like they didn't mean to post it publicly, but it was an enormous list of vaccine side effects and injuries. Was that actually, I don't know the answer to this. So was that actually related to what they already knew, or was that related to other vaccines? What was that?
You know, there's a couple of things that came out of the government that, you know, the sympathetic side has kind of run with a little bit too far. And this may be one, but I do think it's something that people need to be taking seriously. So this slide was done, it was put up in a presentation in October of 2020. So this was during the clinical trial. So what they were doing was they were trying to identify side effects to vaccines historically that they should be looking for in the post-market surveillance for the COVID vaccine rollout. So they had a huge list of neurological complications, transverse myelitis, Guillain-Barré, neuropathies, seizures, tinnitus, there was like all the top hits were on there, right?
Aneurysm. Yeah.
Yeah, aneurysm. So that was another clue for us that they knew, they had a very, very highly educated guess that this was going to happen regardless of the technology of the vaccine, right? And every single one of those things did happen. And yet our own FDA, even though they know that this has happened with previous vaccines, still will not acknowledge that this did in fact happen from the COVID vaccines.
Everybody that I know knows somebody, if they themselves didn't have an issue with the vaccine, everybody I know knows somebody that did, or knows multiple people that did. Also, people, it does seem like it runs in families. I know multiple people in bloodlines who have bad reactions. I actually know two people who had vaccine induced, I know this is very controversial to say, probably not very well known, but ALS.
Mm-hmm.
And I did read that there was a cluster of ALS in the military that they're aware of. Again, not denying it. I think it's mostly young men that was induced by the vaccine. Is that true, by the way?
Yeah, it's true.
Yeah.
And there was a huge uptick in France.
Yeah.
They were open to identifying it there, and they weren't here. And so there's a lot of these individuals that are just kind of floating out there, not sure what to do, but they're slowly dying with a terrible condition. It has happened, and it does happen. And it doesn't just happen with ALS. It happens with Sjogren's. It happens with, like EBV can be reactivated.
Sure.
So so people are like, oh, well, that was going to happen anyway. It's like, well, maybe not,
And if it did, it may not have been when somebody was 30. It's a much different thing. How many people in the military were documented to have ALS from what you know? And do you know any of these patients?
It's definitely happening. The numbers I'm not entirely sure on. I am very close to one individual in the military that got ALS. I know that there were at least 5 that were flown out to the NIH with ALS after the vaccine. Military people.
What's the age?
These are young men. I mean, men in their late 20s to mid 30s, late 30s. So
previously healthy.
Yeah, they're active duty,
The person that I know got it he started to began to start having symptoms, fasciculations about 4 or 5 months after his second shot. And so did another member of his immediate family. Same timeline, everything the same. It takes my breath away.
Yeah, these are, this isn't just a little bit of tingling or a little soreness at the injection site, right? These are life-altering, life-shortening, severe conditions that we are still like expecting people to get better magically on their own. And that's one other thing that Peter Marks said to me twice. He was like, I don't understand why doctors are not treating what's in front of them, regardless of whether the vaccine caused it or not. And we're like, it's because you told them that the vaccines can't do this. So they're not actually looking at an immune upset as the driver behind this.
He doesn't
I don't think
know
they realize,
why doctors aren't treating vaccine injuries.
Yes, he said it twice. And
is he evil?
I can't figure it out. I don't know if he's just being fed, like if he's so well insulated that he's being fed real misinformation.
I don't have any explanation for why he would be perplexed as to why the medical establishment wasn't acknowledging or treating vaccine injuries after all they've done to discredit all of you. It's really. So what would you say? What advice would you give to somebody who's considering going into a clinical trial?
That's a tricky question because I still do believe in science. Like I'm participating in a couple of studies now. When it comes to drug trials, I do really think that there's some serious gaps in the system that need to be filled before I would recommend anybody participate in that process. People probably need to be aware that even if the drug companies or governments put things in writing, it actually doesn't mean anything. They will do what they want anyway, and it's in their best interest, not yours. And there's a whole bunch of safety measures that are supposed to be in place, like the NTSB, and that's the board that's supposed to, you're supposed to be able to independently report if there's a problem. But there's so much pharma influence in all of these different areas that it's not something that I would be comfortable with, suggesting someone sign up for a drug trial.
Yeah.
There's all kinds of other clinical trials you can
Sure.
sign up for and participate in increasing our knowledge on how to improve people with Lyme and ME/CFS
Sure.
and vaccine injury and long COVID. And I do really feel that that's our way out of this, is to generate the data in those spheres. And I definitely encourage people to participate in that every day. Yeah, we've got some serious work to do before drug trials can be considered sound and have the integrity that we expect them to have.
Will we ever have trust again in public health and in any of these products?
It's a good question. I would like to hope for the future of this country that we can figure that out. But we've seen it already in the last several months that the drug companies are not going to give up an inch of the power and influence that they have gained. I don't think that it's something that's just easily going to be won, but I do think it's a battle worth fighting for sure.
Totally agree. So react19.org, that's a great place to go for information, for help, for resources. And in terms of your book and the documentary that you're featured in that's coming out, where can we find those?
So the book is on Amazon, so you can hop online and either put my name. Yep, you can put my name in there, or you can put Worth a Shot. They'll both have the book pop up, and you can get it on your Kindle right away, or you can get a hardback copy in 2 days. It's a really fast read. People have given us just really good feedback on it, and online there's over 70 5-star reviews.
I highly recommend it. It's an incredible story. And your movie.
And the movie, yeah. So we did a documentary on the story, and it's not just vaccine injuries, right? Like it goes into what the drug companies did, what the government did, and it just really highlights the human spirit, what we expect that we all do in hard times, and how we rose above the adversity, and we came out fighting instead of letting this swallow us whole. So this underdog story, it's called Follow the Silenced. Mm-hmm. So if you go onto the website www.followthesilenced.com, you can sign up for their newsletter, and they'll let you know when the global release happens. But we just got back from Hollywood 2 weekends ago, and we were in an international film festival, and we won like the highest prize. We got
congratulations. It's incredible.
So I think it's a good time to start talking about this issue, and for people to start talking about it in a non-polarizing way. Continue to talk about it. Continue to just throw it into conversations every once in a while. We need to get the elephant out of the room.
Out of the shadows. I agree. Yeah. I take COVID very seriously. I take long COVID very seriously. I take vaccine injuries just as seriously. We shouldn't be putting them in a different, only in as much as we may need different treatments and different doctors to be looking at some of these, but we shouldn't be thinking of them differently in the way that these are all medical conditions. Hopefully there will be cures. There will be really effective treatments in the pipeline. I'm praying for that for all of you. And I really appreciate you telling your story and shining light on this. And you're just such a solid person. You do so much good for other people. And I thank you for everything.
Thank you. I really appreciate that.
So this is like the type of neuropathy that Dr. Waheed published back in April. Is that correct? It's kind of a post-COVID vaccine, small fiber neuropathy. We documented a case of that. So that's okay. I'll follow up on it because I got that. Yep. I'm very happy to go back to our, it seems for us to make some kind of a statement publicly, we'd have to find the data in our database that says that in a group of vaccinated individuals versus a group of unvaccinated individuals, or comparing pre-vaccination, post-vaccination, as we sometimes do in intervals, that we have some type of signal. Now, it sounds like if you say that there are thousands of people that have been injured in this way, we're able to, these are relatively uncommon diagnoses. And we were able to pick out, we routinely have picked out, higher incidences of things like Guillain-Barré or thrombotic thrombocytopenia syndrome in the case of the Janssen vaccine. Doesn't have to necessarily be as common as myocarditis, which is also still a relatively rare event. So we want to try to go back through our databases and see if we can tease these out using additional key terms, and see where we get to.
Paresthesia is really high up on the list. I can't send it to you because I sent it to Dr. Woodcock a while ago, but it illustrates, that the reaction starts within 24 to 48 hours for the vast majority, and within the first week for another solid chunk. And just like we mentioned earlier, it's young people, and it's predominantly female, and the top symptoms are all things that are lasting. There are some people, it appears to be about 39 to 40% of us, the symptoms get better with time. The other portion, it appears to be split evenly between symptoms that evolve as time goes on, and there's another chunk of people that things get worse. So we have people that could walk at the beginning and now they can't even walk. And those are the ones that I'm really concerned about. They're all concerning, but the fact that these people went from healthy, functioning people to now they're...
But if they can't walk, that's paralysis. That should show up in databases as paralysis.
Right. So the problem is that they're being diagnosed, inappropriately diagnosed, because nobody knows that this can happen. And so if it is some kind of progressive neuropathy, and all of a sudden their legs are stopping working, and the crazy thing is we've had a couple of kids for quite a while that their ability to get medical care has not progressed at all, because the subset of specialty, as you know, for pediatrics is incredibly small when you start looking into neuropathy in kids and dysautonomia in kids. And so we need to make sure that there's some kind of plan or anything. Even just people being willing to recognize it before this keeps happening to more kids. These kids definitely deserve to have some kind of protocols, or even physicians that are willing to look at it before, their lives get ruined.
So they're not getting pediatric neurology care. It would seem like, if nothing else, they would need to be getting routine care, right? Regardless of of vaccination or not, right?
Yes, and that's what's been frustrating, because they're by and large, and this has been the issue with the adult population as well, because this is not being discussed, and because this is not being communicated with the medical community. Like, even if it's closed communication with medical organizations, I think that would make a lot of headway for people to be able to get appropriate care going. But because it's not recognized on any level, we have several kids that are being labeled with FND, and then they're not even afforded the opportunity at all to get much needed immunotherapy, which is immunomodulatory therapy, which is, what the American Academy of Neurology has said. And I talked to Dr. Woodcock about that too, about what the American Academy of Neurology had issued with their guidance. And they said that these neurological issues could happen from the vaccines. And they listed out several. And they said that because there is a reporting bias, there is concern, and that these reactions, this issue must be acknowledged and possible immunotherapy be implemented. Somehow we need to get that communicated to the medical community, because immunotherapy at a time where people actually need it, they're not being afforded that essential care. I know for myself, I'm 11 months in, and I am just now starting the paperwork with my insurance to file for IVIG. 11 months into it. So at that point, if you think about someone that's got like a cyclical, persistent neurological syndrome that could be, reversed or stopped from a issue of progressive neuropathy, it would only seem appropriate that, that these people are afforded the interventions that are there and are available to try.
The do out that I have is I will go back with our epidemiologists and see exactly what search terms they've queried, where we've gone. I think probably the other thing that I will do is I will try to get from Dr. Woodcock. It sounds like there was a survey that you sent to her. I'll try to get that from her, and if I can't, I'll ask Lori to get in touch with you so we can get another copy just sent to us so I can take a look at that, because I'd like to take a look at that. I haven't seen that myself. We obviously want to try to, we take all adverse events very seriously, and especially if they're really impairing people's lives. In order for us to make some broader statement, we need to try to understand them better. And I think probably by going through our databases appropriately, that may be a helpful start. So I will go check with our statisticians and our epidemiologists and see whether we've actually looked through, because we may have looked at some broader search terms instead of the more specific ones that you've given, to see if we can see anything in terms of a neurologic signal here.
Now, I will say one thing. When we first talked, there were only a few cases of myocarditis, but this dates back more than a year ago, I think, right, Lori? I think that's when we did. Yeah. Now, obviously, we know that there are hundreds of cases. The difference here is now that there are hundreds of cases of myocarditis, and globally, I don't know how many. I mean, I'd have to look in our databases, but we're talking about many, many, many cases of myocarditis that we can distinguish in people who did not have COVID-19 preceding. So we know that wasn't COVID-19 induced myocarditis, and we know when they were vaccinated, and we know the temporal association that it happened generally happened between 2 and 7 days after receiving the vaccine, more commonly with the second dose of vaccine, a little less commonly with the third doses of vaccine, and least common after the first dose of vaccine. So there we have actually, and there's biologic plausibility there. So everything kind of wraps up into a totality that makes us feel, yep, that's a pretty real association, and it's clear. The problem, and it wasn't as clear. That's why, Ms. Dressen, I think you're right that when we only had 6 cases, it wasn't as clear. But now it's become very clear. So the fact that we don't see something doesn't mean that we won't in the future. It means that at this point in time, using the best available tools we have, we don't see anything right now.
Okay, so we're probably in agreement with saying that it's not like it's a certainty that there is not correlation. We're still trying to examine that. Is that what I'm understanding?
I think that is a fair statement. Okay. That is an absolutely fair statement. Okay. There were animal studies done that looked at the duration, some of the duration issues, non-clinical studies that were done. But the assumption here was that these mRNA vaccines behave like previous mRNA vaccines, in which generally within days of the of administration, the expression of the mRNA is gone. Now, I know that there have been reports of spike protein present later, and some of those are ones that we are following up on. I don't have a final answer I can give you on that, because so I can't say yes or no of how long that could be present. But your point, I understand your point there is that the concern about spike proteins potentially being present for additional periods of time.
The other interesting thing about that is we just got word last week that the NIH did study that with us, and the majority of those of us, and it's in their study that they already put in the preprint, we didn't have COVID before we got our vaccine, right? And for the clinical trial, I mean, they had to confirm that I had not had COVID. And so the question is, why is there spike protein in our blood if we never had COVID, but we got vaccinated? So either we had asymptomatic COVID or, our bodies are having an issue metabolizing the spike, which also is important to communicate to the research community in particular, because long haulers also have the same issue. And then also, in addition to that, as you know, the European Union did put paresthesias on the package insert, which can you guys raise your hand if you still have paresthesias? Okay, so we're looking at least 75% of the people at the table. So I think that even though it seems like it's a minor detail, just letting people know that paresthesias could happen is going to change them from anxiety or whatever psychosomatic misdiagnosis that we get to why do people have paresthesias? Why is this happening to them? It's very common.
I call for transparency and that we be informed of the adverse events associated with a vaccine so we can make informed decisions. It's too late for my son, but had the risks been properly disclosed and the clinical trial data publicly available, Victor would have made an informed decision and would be here for me to hold once again. Thank you.
Thanks so much for sharing that, and I'm so sorry for your loss. Our goal is always to try to understand the safety of these vaccines as best as we can, and we struggle. I know it may not seem that way perhaps to you, but we struggle very diligently and to try to understand safety signals and to make use of them and in changing labels as quickly as we can. We don't have any secrets here. Our goal is to understand and to make the public aware of the benefits and risks of these vaccines.
To date, I'm in my 21 months of hell, and my case has still not been reported to VAERS by any of my doctors. So how can you be so sure about your signal method if half of our cases are underreported? I have begged my doctors to report it, but they don't.
Anyone can report to VAERS. So if your doctor has not reported, you should report. It should definitely be reported. And so I don't understand that. I don't quite understand why a doctor would refuse to report to VAERS, because reporting to VAERS doesn't imply anything other than somebody who got a vaccine had a side effect.
I can tell you because I work at Weill Cornell Medicine, right? So I see there's many of them have not reported cases. One, I think they have to make a judgment about it. My provider clearly knows what happened to me. He agrees it's the vaccine. I think it's just they're overwhelmed like most medical providers these days, so they don't take the time to do it. So he said for me to do it. But I really think that medical doctors should do it. They're required to do it.
The VAERS system
and I have never had
is
COVID,
broken.
so my case is like as clear as can be. As a researcher, there's not only temporal association, but there's just a clear, definitive association. So it's indisputable what has happened.
I think we're over time.
And it's just unfortunate that the medical system is failing us. I have to say, it's the biggest shock of my medical career.
Thanks for joining us today. Please subscribe or follow along for more really interesting conversations. And I'd love to hear from you. So please drop a comment or send me a note. Let me know what you think.